Mysteries of Glass Revealed was made for the convention of the International Perfume Bottle Association. In addition to mysteries, I could add misconceptions or misunderstandings revealed. Many collectors and even authors, without technical expertise in glassmaking, use terms to identify techniques that are inaccurate. These terms are then picked up by more collectors and subsequent authors and repeated. If it's in print, it must be true, but not necessarily. I will point out some of these technical errors in an attempt to correct them using information gathered from glassmakers and technical journals. Many processes have been invented to replicate something of value in a less expensive way, a great motivator for ingenuity. The fact that glass is made from sand is not a mystery. The purity of the sand affects the quality of the glass. Most sand has iron impurities, which will make the glass a greenish or brownish tint. That is why most cheap glass, like wine and beer bottles, are green or brown. Ingredients like manganese can be added to neutralize the iron. Sand without impurities is expensive and not found in many places in the world. Spruce Pine, North Carolina has some of the purest sand in the U.S. Glassmakers have tended to go where the source of the raw materials are, beginning with forests with wood for fuel. When the materials are used up, they would relocate. The raw batch is a powdered silica with fluxes such as potash, soda ash, or lead to make it melt at a lower temperature, to use less fuel, and to make the glass work longer before needing to be reheated. Lime needs to be added to chemically stabilize the glass. You're all probably familiar with the term sick glass, which is caused by a recipe without enough lime, causing the glass to get greasy and cloudy. There are an infinite variety of glass recipes. For color, oxides and carbonates are added, such as cobalt, nickel, cadmium, selenium, copper, etc. The batch is mixed by the tumbler, then shoveled into the hot furnace. Cullet, which is recycled glass from the factory, is usually added. It must be compatible with the batch. It reduces the cost of melting the glass. Many hand-blowing factories do not make their own colored glass. They buy color bars, which can be used in numerous ways. Chunks can be heated and applied to the glass parazon on the blowpipe. A parazon is the initial gather of glass with an air bubble, but not shaped. There are companies that just specialize in making colored glass to supply to glass blowers. Many companies also buy their raw batch or buy a form that is pelletized. Molds have been used since the beginning of glass blowing in Syria, approximately 1 AD. The greenish cup is an example of early Roman glass that has been blown in a terracotta mold. This allowed them to mass produce glass articles inexpensively. There's a saying on the side of this cup that was in the mold. It says, "Enyon made it, let the buyer remember." A wonderful example of early marketing. Today molds are usually wood, graphite, or metal. The red diamond quilted glass on the pipe is from an optic mold. Optic molds, as in the bottom right, are tapered, so the patterned glass can be easily removed. Metal molds are made for hand blowing, pressing, semi-automatic, and automatic glass production. They can have multiple sections hinged together. Making metal molds requires a high degree of skill. They can cost from $4,000 to $20,000. You would need to make a large quantity of pieces to warrant the cost of a metal mold. The Ingrid mold is for a perfume bottle from Czechoslovakia. None of these perfume bottles are hand-cut or engraved, intaglio, acid-etched, or sandblasted to create the textures. All of the elaborate designs on these bottles were created by the mold. They have been enhanced later by being stained, enameled, or frosted with acid. The glass stoppers like this clear one are pressed. The design is in the mold. Wooden molds are made for hand blowing. They're made from wood such as beech, cherry, or pear because they have very little pitch. They're turned on a lathe with special tools to carve on the inside of the form. When being used, they're kept wet. Some can have a top that hinges closed, as in the bottom middle. In the lower left picture, I'm with my husband and our friend Petr Novotny in the mold area at his factory in Nový Bor in the Czech Republic. A significant invention in the development of glassmaking was press molding, invented in America about 1825. It made glass affordable. This machine is called a side lever press. There's a plunger that comes down to press the glass into the mold.
It's ready for transfer to the iron mold. When the mold is partly full, a worker snips the liquid glass with scissors to cut the flow. He places a ring with pegs on the rim to align the mold with a plunger. He lowers the plunger and applies physical pressure to a lever to squeeze the glass into every crevice. This transforms the glass blob into a berry bowl, with elaborate impressions on the outside. As it cools, the bowl hardens just enough to be extracted, but it's still quite soft. Careful to not distort the shape, he transfers the bowl to 2 bricks. A hose below the bricks pumps air to cool the glass further. Over a period of 4 hours, the team makes 250 berry bowls. Some of the bowls will be flattened to turn them into dessert plates, while others will be worked into the shape of candy baskets.
The molds can press elaborate designs that simulate cut glass at a much lower cost. Normally, pressing is not used for perfume bottles. Many collectors and authors mistakenly call bottles pressed when I think they mean made in a mold, as in the picture top right that came from an article in the Perfume Bottle Quarterly. This is a mold for blowing, not for pressing. Pressing uses a plunger to press the glass down into the open mold. No air is introduced. This is one of the most important points I want to make, clarifying the difference between pressed glass and mold-blown glass. The mark on the bottom of hand-blown glass is from breaking off the glass used to attach the punty rod, as it's most commonly called. The punty holds the piece while finishing the top in the glory hole. The mark can be distinctive, like this 4-point one at the top, or it can be one simple point and later be hollow ground away. If the bottom of the piece is concave, it may not be necessary to grind the mark. No punty mark will be made on a blown piece if it's finished using a snap tool. This tool came into common use about 1840. It holds the blown piece for finishing of the top in place of the punty. The snap tool can be used with hand-blown, pressed, or semi-automatic made bottles.
Once the glass is firmed up enough, the bowls take a couple of trips through the glazer. First upside down, and then right side up. A gas flame melts the outer layer of the glass to make it shine both inside and out. He clamps the bowl onto the end of a rod called a snap and places it into a second, smaller furnace briefly. This softens the glass to prepare it for another transformation.
Atomizers do not need to be put on a punty because the top of the bottle does not need to be finished since it will be covered with a cap. It will be cut off the blowpipe like the purple bottle. Many glass studios use a torch to soften and smooth the punty mark before it's put into the annealing oven. A semi-automatic bottle blowing machine was devised in England in 1888, and one was patented in 1901 by Claude Boucher, a brilliant Frenchman who at the age of 27 managed a glass factory. Boucher was motivated to invent a technique that lessened negative effects on the worker's health, such as transfers of disease through the use of a common blowpipe. As a result of his invention, production was dramatically increased. This coincided with a significant increase in the demand for pharmaceutical and wine bottles. Most high-end commercial perfume bottles are made using the semi-automatic process, including Lalique and Baccarat. It still requires an operator, however, the air is introduced by compressor. This process is used for most of the high-end commercial perfume bottles. In the drawing, manual step 1A, the glass is cut into the mold. 1B, air from the top pushes the glass into the neck mold. Step 2, air is blown up from the bottom. Then the glass is removed to transfer to the next mold. Step 3, air is blown from the top. And 4, the finished bottle is removed from the mold. Drawing B illustrates the next advance in production, the automatic process that replaces the human with robotic arms. A gather of molten glass is dropped into the first mold by the operator. At the bottom of this first mold is a two-piece mold that shapes the neck of the bottle. Compressed air is forced up from the bottom into the mass of glass. Step 2, the operator transfers the hot glass, which is held by the collar mold on the neck, turning it over and placing it into the second mold where compressed air is introduced from the top. Some articles may require 3 forming molds. This process is used when the demand for the number of bottles is more than can be produced by hand blowing and less than what's needed for automatic production. You would need to make at least 10,000 pieces or more to warrant automatic production. From Vers-Bras in France, we see a semi-automatic process. The glass is mechanically cut into the mold, not hand-gathered. The compressed air comes up from the bottom. The man transfers the glass, turning it into the forming mold. Then it is fire polished. Before going into the lyre for annealing. In the second operation, you can see that the man has been replaced by a mechanized arm that gathers and drops the hot glass into the mold. The second operator is making a much smaller commercial perfume bottle that cools quickly. They will be reheated and put through the annealing process. Because this is still a semi-manual process, there's a smaller number of pieces made than with automatic production. Automatic production evolved from semi-automatic. automatic process, a continuous melt furnace, and feeding systems for the delivery of glass to the molds needed to be devised. The first patent was in 1901. The machinery replaces the manual moving of the glass from the first mold to the second mold and out of the mold to the belt leer for cooling. It replaces the human. It's used for mass production like Avon bottles. A machine was patented for threading in 1885 by the Poschinger Glass Factory in the Bohemian village of Frauenau, where we have visited and worked over many years. The blowpipe with the hot glass was inserted into the machine, which consists of a metal tube with screw threads on the outside. It was turned with a crank. Soon after its invention, most major glass houses had one. The ruby threading was done by the Poschinger machine. The colored drawing shows another method of threading using offset rollers on the arm of the glass blower's bench. The woman top left is using offset rollers to thread. Whenever you see very thin and tightly spaced threading, it's usually been done by machine. The glass blower can also apply random threads, as in this gold Durand atomizer. The green threaded piece shows an innovation of engraving cut through the threading. The first threading and combing was done by the Syrians on sandcore bottles. Combing is done by using a tool with a pick to manipulate the hot glass threads or hand trails. This one is from Orient and Flume Art Glass in Chico, California, the company we started in 1972. We were the first studio to decorate paperweights with threaded and combed patterns like this green one. An infinite number of patterns are possible. Patterns like on the green Steuben vase are called hooked feather. The combing on the orange bottle was done by a machine that was invented by Northwood in 1885. The Venetians are masters of using cane for decoration. Optic molds can be used to pattern the cane. The canes can be picked up from a form, as in the top left, or rolled up on the parazon, as in the drawing upper right. Canes can be bundled and heated to make millefiori, as in the lower left. These drawings are made by Walter Lieberman for the Tacoma Glass Museum in Washington. Top center picture shows the artist pulling glass off the end of a parazon to make the furnace-dipped casing thinner. Case glass is gathered out of the furnace. It will be thicker than the overlay method. Top left illustration shows a method called Swedish overlay. Step 1, the clear parazon with a colored blown ball shape. Step 2 has the hot colored blown ball applied to the top of the parazon. Step 3, it's pushed back over the parazon using jacks. Step 4 has produced a very thin outer layer of color, ideal for cameo, for cutting or engraving. The bottom left illustrates a hot glass method of casing where a marving plate is used to push the glass over the parazon. Step 3 shows a second casing of clear. The layer is thick. It's not ideal for fine cameo. Overlay is sometimes called flashed, which refers to a thin layer. The center example shows a piece with a gather of white with a clear casing and thin overlays of pink and white. The clear makes the pink and white layers float. On the neck of the blue bottle, you see 3 layers, a thick layer of blue and thin overlays of rose and white. Most likely this was done using a cup overlay. The top illustration shows the technique of overlay to get a thin layer called cupping. The cup is made ahead of time by blowing and put into a form for picking up on the parazon on the blowpipe. A cup can also be made ahead of time and reheated in a kiln till ready to use. In Bohemia, they have used pressed glass cups to produce the thin overlay. The hot glass is allowed to touch the bottom of the cup, but not the sides. Then as it's blown, it presses against the sides of the cup, so no air is trapped. Thin layers can be produced for fine cameo cutting this way. There are many expressions of cameo glass. Sometimes it varies by where it's made, like English cameo is very different from French cameo. Even Gallet is different from the Dôme French cameo. There are many examples of cameo being misidentified. The brown and white vase by Phoenix Glass, top right, is said to be sculpted cameo, but it's actually white glass blown in a mold, then the background and details are enameled brown. The blue elephant's vase is wheel engraved by a Czech artist, Jaromír Sostek, who died in 2018. His work is masterful. This was one of many of his pieces for sale in the Egerman shop in Prague. The first bottle is also contemporary carving from Germany. The black and white piece is contemporary sandblasting by Valerie Surjan from California. It's only 2 layers of glass, but with careful blasting, it appears to be 3 colors. The bottle top center by Thomas Webb & Sons has a geometric pattern, which makes it unique, as most definitions of English cameo don't include geometric. The pink and white is acid-cut Steuben. The yellow is a multi-layer English cameo. The next piece is by Dôme with enameling. The final piece is one style of Gallet that's very dimensional. What is the definition of cameo? It can be confusing as to whether a piece is cameo or not. All the definitions I've found say it's at least 2 layers of contrasting color. 1 layer could be clear. A process, either cutting, engraving, carving, acid, sandblasting, or a combination of these, is used to remove parts of the outer layer to reveal a design that exposes the underlying color. Does the motif define it? Traditionally, English cameo was representational, such as landscape or florals, but then here's a geometric piece. Does it depend on where the piece was made? It's difficult to answer, and it may depend on what you have collected or want to sell. I've not come up with a definitive definition that works for all cameo. I think each style has its own definition. Acid cutback is a less expensive technique. Plate etching is often used, which I will explain later. The glass is dipped in acid to etch the design. The de Vilbis green and orange pieces are both only clear glass with interior enameled color and gold luster. The gold box lid has an etched design through clear glass, then it has been frosted, painted with gold luster, and fired. Sometimes the cutback is only on one color of glass, using the contrast of matte and shiny surfaces to create the design, as in the amethyst Steuben piece. Some might say the top 3 pieces at the left are cameo. All of them are cut with acid, and they are all 2 different layers of glass. They're sort of a floral motif. Are they acid cutback or cameo? In plate etching, a pattern is engraved into a metal plate. Step 2, asphaltum or wax resist is applied to the plate. The excess is scraped away. Tissue paper is pressed onto the design. The plate is kept warm to allow the wax to be picked up by the tissue. In step 4, transfer paper and applied to the glass. The tissue is soaked off, leaving the asphaltum resist pattern. Step 5, resist is then painted on all areas not to be etched. The glass is dipped in hydrofluoric acid to etch the design. Often the etched pattern is gold luster. Some authors have called this encrusted. However, this term is not in any glass dictionaries for this process that I could find. It's used by de Vilbis for a different effect called rotten acid. Sometimes terms used for one thing are extrapolated to a different process. In the case of Cambridge using the term encrusted, I think it was for the salesman to enhance the value of the glass. It doesn't describe a technical process. A 1938 trade journal from Cambridge says of incrustation, "The Cambridge process fuses pure gold deep into the crystal at great heat, creating a decoration of satin richness as permanent as it is beautiful and surprisingly moderate in cost." A great sales pitch. Here are satin and frosted examples. Glass is normally shiny. Satin is a matte finish that can be created on hot glass by fuming or on cold glass by dipping in hydrofluoric acid or sandblasting. Now there's a matte finish that can be sprayed on the warm glass from automatic production before it goes into the annealing layer to create the frosted finish. The red bottle at top center was all satin and then cut and polished where it's shiny. The stoppered bottle to the right has some shiny raised lines that may have been buffed through the frosted surface. Aventurine was invented about 1840. The Venetians were the masters. It was very difficult to produce. The aventurine glass in the pot furnace requires cooling and reheating to get the copper crystals to appear. After melting, the pot is turned off, and when cold, the glass is chipped out of the pot. The chips can be rolled onto the hot glass from the marving plate. It's rare to find a solid blown piece of aventurine. It was most commonly used in jewelry. It's also used in a variety of canes. Sheets of gold or silver foil are placed on the marving plate where it's picked up by rolling the hot glass over it. When the parazon is cased with a clear or transparent color, the blown foil surface breaks up to look like tiny flakes of gold. The foil technique has been mistakenly identified as aventurine. Gold or silver mica can also be used for a similar effect. If the foil is not cased, it can look like the blue bottle on the bottom row or the black bottle. Foil would only be used in hand-blown glass, not semi or automatic production. The Italian name for it is foglia d'oro. Rotten acid technique, animal glue chipping, and crackle are confused by collectors. Glue chipping is done by applying a glue, often made from rabbit or other animal hide, to the glass. The piece is heated in a kiln. When it cools, the glass shrinks and pulls chips of glass away in feathery or fern-like patterns. The yellow flower with glue chipping was on a perfume bottle of mine. Rotten acid is so called, according to Harvey Littleton, because the hydrofluoric acid was mixed with milk. This clotted the milk, which looked rotten. The broken up clots held the acid, so when applied to the glass, it etched the surface in very irregular and distinctive patterns. This may be just a story, because textbooks don't mention the milk. It's quite a chancy procedure. You don't know exactly how it will turn out. Some people call this sponged acid. It sounds like it refers to a kind of sponge with gold luster effect. It looks a lot like rotten acid. De Vilbius noted it as encrusted. Another confusing term is stippling, which was used by Cambridge. To produce a crackle effect, the hot glass is immersed in cold water. It's immediately removed and blown. The cracks expand when it's blown. De Vilbius crackled glass atomizers are often mirrored inside. The bottle was silver or gold. The mirroring would be sealed with lacquer. Opal is a translucent glass made with a recipe containing fluorine, tin oxide, or phosphate. It glows in transmitted light. The blue and white bottle top left is an example of opal glass. Striking opal is a heat-sensitive glass containing bone ash and arsenic. When the parazon is blown into a patterned mold producing a raised decoration on the outside, and allowed to cool slightly below red heat, then reheated in the glory hole, the opal glass strikes where the raised pattern was cooled from the mold. The striking develops a milky pattern of stripes or dots, like in the de Vilbius coin dot. Before striking, it is clear. It's not two separate colors of glass. It's not white stripes over a clear or colored glass. It is one glass that changes color in a pattern. Sabino is also a striking opal glass. Traditionally, cut glass was made using stone wheels. Cutting is done with wheels of different profiles on a lathe, as in the drawing top right. There are basically round, oval, and square cuts depending on the shape of the wheel. The wheels are kept wet with a water feed. The glass is marked where it should be cut. The first cuts leave a matte, rough surface, like on the blue goblet. This needs to be followed by making the same cuts again with a smoother, polishing wheel. Today, the final polish is often done by dipping in a mixture of hydrofluoric and sulfuric acids. This is a less time-consuming and less expensive method of polishing. Traditionally, in cutting, the glass piece is held above the wheel. Today, diamond-sintered metal wheels are most often used. The Bohemian cut-to-clear crystal is never referred to as cameo, but it has all of the elements, 2 layers cut through to make a pattern in the clear underlayer. Engraving achieves more fine detail and can create flowing lines rather than geometric patterns. Traditionally, it was done using copper wheels with grit of carborundum fed onto the wheel, but now diamond wheels are often used. It can be polished by acid. The glass piece is traditionally held under the wheel. This is engraving on Agerman red glass. The man will use one wheel to engrave a part of the design on all of these glasses, then change to another wheel to engrave another part of the design on all the glasses. This is engraving on Agerman red glass. The gold eagle paperweight was engraved on Orient and Flume iridescent glass by Lubomir Richter of Steuben Glass. Gold luster is not an enamel, it's metal oxide. Enamels are glass. Gold luster has to be fired differently from colored enamels. It's often fired in an electric kiln, which keeps it out of contact with gas fumes. It's fired at a lower temperature in a reduction atmosphere, which means a lack of oxygen. After the gold is fired, it has to be cleaned or burnished with an agate or other material if you want it to be shiny. Lusters come in many colors. Gold luster comes in shiny or Glanz gold and not shiny, which is called Polier gold in German. Polier gold is 22 karat. Sometimes an undercoat is applied. There are gold lusters today that are less expensive and don't require reduction firing or burnishing. Lusters can also be made of oxides of copper, silver, platinum, or bismuth. It's dissolved in acid and mixed with an oil medium, which burns out in the firing. Frederick Agerman invented a method of yellow or red staining in 1820. It made him a wealthy man. It took the place of the more expensive gold ruby case glass. It was easily engraved. The process takes several steps and firings. It doesn't work well on all types of glass, best on a potash-based glass. The first coating containing copper oxide looks like clay, number 1 in the series. After firing and cleaning, it creates yellow. The next firing in reduction turns it black. number 2. And the final firing in oxidation turns it a beautiful red. This is another clever glass invention that replaces a very skilled and expensive process of making gold ruby overlay for engraving. Enamel is a finely powdered glass mixed with a fluxing agent and coloring oxides. It must melt and fuse to the glass at a temperature below the slumping temperature of the glass. A stain, as in the top right, is a translucent enamel that's often sprayed on. It's also fired so it won't rub off. Some call it a patina, which I think is just a French name for a stain. Some enameling simulates cameo glass, such as the white enamel on the red Mary Gregory piece. The black enamel on orange is another style that simulates French cameo. It's a cheaper way to make something that looks like a more expensive glass object. The middle left picture shows enamel being applied in dots. Even though they seem raised, they're not done using the thick enamel. They're just allowed to puddle up. The raised enamel is similar to cake decorating. The series on the top row shows the steps in the decorating process from left to right. In German, this is called Hochmehlmalerei. The first step on the left is the matte undercoat, or Matsuberzug. Step 2 and 3 add the leaves. Step 4 adds the raised dots. The enamel used to make the raised petals contains powdered porcelain mixed with gum arabic to make a thick paste. Step 4A, top left, you can see the raised petals being shaped with a wooden tool. It is fired, and then in step 5, colored enamel is applied and it's fired again. Far right is a gallet piece with thick enamel that's applied between outlines. The outlines keep the enamel in place, similar to cloisonné. The blue atomizer has thick enamel in the Portuguese style. The bottle on the left has raised gold branches. Amazing designs can be made with decals. Traditionally, they are silk screened on decal paper. Only one screen per color, so many screens are needed to produce multicolored designs. Enamel, or a metallic luster, is screened onto a special water slide decal paper. Then when it's dry, it's coated with a clear top coat. The individual image is soaked in water to release the enamel from the paper. It's still held in place by the top coat. The image is slid off the paper to transfer to the glass. A rubber kidney, like the green one at top, is used to press the decal down and remove excess moisture and any bubbles. Then it's fired on in a kiln. Decals can be made using gold and silver metallic lusters or colored enamels like this one for Laura Ashley. The black banding on the orange bottle with the decal figure would be painted by hand. In the Cambridge example, top right, the design has been called silk screened by the author, but I don't think it was silk screened onto the curved glass. It was silk screened onto decal paper. These two terms are used interchangeably. Silver overlay is thicker, sometimes hallmarked and often beautifully engraved, like my Lotes at top center that I treasure and saved from the Paradise Fire. Silver deposit is so called because ions of one metal with a positive electrode are attracted to and so deposited on the second metal with a negative electrode. This is done in an electroplating bath. The glass has to be prepared by painting on the design with a wash containing a powdered silver flux that's fired on. The silver comes from an ingot in the bath. After the deposit is complete, the glass is buffed and polished. Electroplating can be used with metals like copper. The example top right was mistakenly identified as silver overlay, but it was done with painting a silver luster. I have more research to do on the technique of silver overlay. Do you have any opinion or information to pass on? Needle etching is an amazing technique. We saw it in Portugal in 1970. The glass is coated with wax and placed on the turnstile platforms. There's a metal plate with a design engraved into it in a large scale. The operator traces the pattern with a stylus attached by arms to the pantograph machine. His pen duplicates the design to a set of needles at each turnstile that pecks the design in miniature through the wax on the glass. The glass is then dipped in hydrofluoric acid to etch the pattern. The wax is steamed off and the glass is polished with sawdust. 24 glasses could be done at one time on this machine. This would be a less expensive way to simulate engraving or plate etching. Lamp working is more commonly called flame working. It is a glass made with a torch using tubing or solid glass rods. An amazing array of things can be made with this ancient technique. Beads were made in the 4th century BC. This is my friend Reini in Germany, who can make anything from this large glass tubing, such as a teapot, wine glass, and candle holder. The teapot handles are filled with Swarovski crystals. Top left, he's using a snap tool, just like in glass blowing. If you look at perfume bottles on eBay, you've probably seen these bottles from Egypt, Israel, or China. They're made with flame working. These are painted with lusters. This movie is a fast overview of some things that can be made with flame work.